And next up we have is Amy Bucher. She's a director of behavior change design at Mad Pow. So welcome Amy to the stage.
Hi, good morning everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Today I want to talk about meaningful engagement through behavior change design. And where I want to start is the way that we talk about things. Because the language that we use when we talk about something influences the way that we think about it. And we're all here because we're passionate about helping people. We're passionate about helping people with their health and with their well-being. But we use language that I think sometimes works at cross purposes to what we hope to achieve. And the specific phrase that I'm going to pick on here is patient engagement. And I'm not blaming or criticizing anybody in particular, but I think the phrase has some problems with it that prevent us from doing as much as we could to help people. So when we think about patient engagement, what are we really talking about? Whose goals are we trying to get patients to achieve? Because I think oftentimes it's really our goals, not theirs. We're looking at clinical outcomes. We're looking at what we know is good for people from a health perspective, from a science perspective. But is it what they really want in their lives? How does it work with the things that they really care about in their lives? Are we talking about that? For whose benefit is it? I can tell you that in my years working with clients or working internal to a company, when we think about why do we want to take this initiative, a lot of the conversation is not about the people that we're trying to help. It's about the economics of what we're trying to do. There's a good ROI on this. This will really drive down costs. This will improve utilization rates. Those are good things. I'm not saying they're not. But if we're really trying to help people, maybe that's not the language that should be primary. And then with what consequences if I don't? Who really gets hurt if we don't engage patients? The patients maybe, but I would argue that oftentimes we're really thinking about our own consequences there. Right around the time that I was first writing this talk, Harvard Business Review came out with this article here, how pharmacists can help ensure that patients take their medicines. I actually think it's a great article, even though, again, I'm picking on it here, because it does exactly what I'm talking about, where it uses this very heavy-handed, paternalistic, coercive type of language, even in the title. In that phrase, medication adherence. Adherence, to me, it's a very tough, sort of regimental type of term. If you read this article, they actually go into some really touching stories where pharmacists have an opportunity to talk to people who are coming to fill a script and really understand what they care about and what in their lives might be getting in the way of taking their medications the way that they're supposed to be taken. So in the article, they talk about a gentleman named Stanley who is diabetic and is supposed to take insulin 5 times a day, but really struggles with the middle of the day because he takes care of his 2 school-age grandchildren in the afternoons. He's busy playing with the kids, really getting down on the floor, enjoying them, and he forgets or doesn't want to walk away from that happy family time to attend to an illness that makes him feel negative. It's not a good thing for him to think about. They talk about an older woman who is using many medications, and she gets so frustrated by trying to organize them into a pill box that she just doesn't do it at all. Those are very human problems. And if you approach people as people rather than as patients, I think you can start to solve them a little bit differently than when you come in with your expert eye and you try to create medication adherence. I'd like to argue that behavior change design is a way to help us do that because it has engagement at its core. If you were part of the leadership forum yesterday, I talked through several behavior change theories and some of the trade-offs that they have associated with them. When you choose a particular behavior change approach to solve a problem, you are, right from the outset, engaging in some assumptions about what might be effective to help people. So is this going to be an environmental solution where we change the context in which this behavior takes place? Or is this going to be something where we really talk to the individual and try to change something about their mindset so that they approach the behavior differently? One thing I would say, though, is that all of these approaches, all of these theories, they start with understanding the person and the context in which the person exists. And by doing that, it shifts the language a little bit, and it helps us to really see what might help that individual. So one behavior change model, and this is one that I did talk about a bit yesterday, is the combi model, which essentially says that for a behavior to take place, 3 things need to exist. So the person needs to have the capability to do the behavior, and that is both the physical capability and the psychological capability, the knowledge of how to do it. There's the opportunity to do it, and that is the social opportunity. So what are the people around them enabling, supporting, making difficult? And the physical opportunity, that environment that they're in. And then motivation is something that's very internal to the person. And it has to do with the goals that they have. And it has to do with the implicit ideas that they have about how the world works. So this is just a way to visualize it that I like, because I think what it shows is that it's really all about understanding who that person is and how they exist in the world. And once we understand that, once we see where there may be issues that are getting in the way of a desired behavior or helping a desired behavior to happen more often, we can use those as leverage points. We can either build an intervention around them to help support the person. Let's augment your capability with some education. Let's give you opportunity by offering you the opportunity to use a new location for your physical activity. Or here, get with a social group so that when you take that walk, it's a pleasant part of your day you look forward to instead of an unpleasant workout that you don't want. And then motivation, of course, really about helping people connect with what matters to them and see how their behaviors may or may not be in alignment with that. This is a project that we worked on last year where we really used this combi model to affect people's behaviors. And what we were trying to do here was actually keep construction workers safe on the job. So in the last 15 to 20 years, the injury rates among construction workers in the United States have fallen pretty dramatically, which is great. We don't want to see people get hurt, and it's not good for them either. The one thing that hasn't fallen is what's called serious injuries and fatalities. There aren't a lot of them, maybe 10 to 15 a year, but that stayed pretty steady even while safety equipment has improved, even while training courses have improved. It just doesn't seem to be a nut that has been cracked by the toolkit that safety people have. So we did some research at 3 construction sites, and we used the combi model to organize that research. We talked to construction workers at each of these sites. We observed them on the job, and we talked to them about, what do you know? Is it a training issue? And it really wasn't for the most part. People do understand what behaviors they need to engage in to stay safe on the job. And in terms of motivation, they want to stay safe. This is something that is important to them. Obviously, nobody wants to get hurt. But what we observed is that there were some opportunities, some opportunities to improve the physical environment to keep people safe. And that was also partly due to a motivational issue, which is that people want to be good at their jobs. They want to be successful at their jobs. And so what we saw was that workers hear that it's important to stay safe, and they do believe it, but they also hear, this job's got to get done. This job's got to get done within the next 6 months or the next week or the end of the day. And those things are competing in their minds. And so when then they get into a physical situation where the right equipment isn't right next to the area where I'm working, and I'm going to have to go walk 10 minutes across this large job site to go grab the right equipment, it's going to delay my task maybe 20 minutes when it's all said and done. They may make the decision without even thinking that they're making a decision that, I'll just keep working with the stuff I have, it's good enough. And those are the situations in which accidents happen. So we were able to identify some of these unique intersections of opportunity and motivation that can then be addressed by either changing the way the job site is set up, providing different training about what to do when you find yourself in those situations, or actually working with supervisors to help them identify those situations. Another model that we sometimes use is the transtheoretical model, or the stages of change. And where this really holds the person at the center is that it considers where in their behavior change journey they are. So there are, depending on which version of the transtheoretical model you look at, 5 or 6 stages. This version has 6, but basically people start off not even really thinking about changing a behavior, and then they go to thinking about it, and now I'm really ready to try it, and now I'm actually trying it, and now I've done it, I've succeeded, and I'm maintaining this new behavior. It's part of my repertoire. And then sometimes they may relapse. That's very, very common with behavior change. And when they do relapse, they start the cycle over again. And the nice thing about change is oftentimes when you've gone through the process once and failed, you do better the second time and then the third time because you've learned something. You've practiced these skills before. You're not starting from zero. You may have some idea of what does and does not work for you. The really important person-centric thing about this that I do like is that you don't take somebody directly from pre-contemplation to action. That's not realistic according to this model. The goal is to move people stage by stage. So if you're trying to help somebody with a behavior change problem and they're really not in a place yet where they're ready to take action, this theory would tell you to sit with that. that that's okay, that you work with them where they are and you help them take baby steps to the next stage. So even though your goal for them or the medical goal for them might be to go all the way into action and be taking this behavior change, that's not the way that you approach it if you want them to ultimately get there. One place where this particular theory has been used to great success is with smoking cessation, so it aligns really nicely to the way that people think about quitting tobacco. This is a screenshot from becomeanx.org. It's a website or intervention created by the Truth Initiative, which is a nonprofit in DC. And they used a clinical protocol from the Mayo Clinic to build this. So it's a really nice example of the transtheoretical model in action, because if you're a person who uses tobacco and you come to this intervention, it learns a little bit about you. It wants you to set a date to quit smoking, because that, first of all, setting a quit date is highly correlated with actually quitting. So that's a really important step. It's a leading indicator of whether or not somebody might actually quit smoking. But it also gives them that important information about where are you in this smoking cessation journey? Are you able to give a date? Because if not, maybe you're in that pre-contemplation stage, and maybe all we need to do right now is start to talk about, what would life be like if you thought about quitting smoking? Would anything be different? Maybe here's a little bit of information about what the quit journey might be like. But we're not going to try to persuade you. We're not going to try to move you along too far right at this point. We're just going to try to plant the seeds in your head. But if somebody does set a quit date, that tells you a lot about, are you ready to do this right now? Is tomorrow the day you take action? So everything hinges on that quit date, and the program is actually able to provide people with appropriate support depending on where they are in the stage. So it's a really nice example of how you can use that framework to be really person-centric and give people what they need at that time. And then the third approach that I want to talk about is the self-determination theory of motivation, which I also talked about a little bit yesterday. But again, this is very person-centric. And one of its core tenets is that we don't think about motivation as being high or low. We think about it as having a quality to it. So when we talk to people, we want to assess what is it that is driving you toward this behavior. And there are 6 buckets. A, motivated is you're not interested. So similar to transtheoretical model, this might not be somebody who's ready to make a change. This might be somebody that we just plant a seed with and let them be for a while. But then from there, we have externally motivated people who are looking, we tend to think of this as being a reward, like a financial reward, but oftentimes it can be something like, my doctor tells me every year when I go in for my visit that I'm overweight, and I'm really tired of that. I'm really, really tired of that. And so next year I'm going to show him. I'm going to show up and I'm going to be in shape, and he is not going to say that to me. That's an external motivation, and it's a very real one that we see in healthcare. Unfortunately, the problem with external motivation is it doesn't tend to persist once that motivator is removed from the equation. And people who are externally motivated, their behaviors are really susceptible to barriers. So when the going gets tough, the externally motivated leave the road. There's introjected motivation when people internalize that external voice. So, I'm out in the world and I think, my doctor would be really disappointed if he saw what I'm doing right now. He may not be there saying that to me, but that's his voice in my head. And again, not a really strong source of motivation for challenging long-term behavior change. But then we have these more resilient forms of motivation, the autonomous forms of motivation. And these are things that people really own. They're personal to them. So you have your identified motivation when you have values or goals. This is when it's related to who you are as a person. Integrated motivation, you have values or goals, things that you deeply care about, and the behaviors are helping you to live into those values or goals. That's very important to people, to be the type of person that you see yourself as. And then intrinsic motivation is when something is just enjoyable for its own sake. And we all have examples in our own lives of things that are like that. When we think about it from a behavior change perspective, one of the ways that we can help people to get to those more autonomous, resilient forms of motivation is by satisfying their basic psychological needs. So when we talk to people, we think about how do we let them make their own meaningful choices? How do we let them raise their hand and say, yes, this is something I want to do, not something you're telling me to do? Once people make that decision, they're far more likely to be interested in engaging in that behavior over time. There's also competence. We are very growth-oriented as a species. We are constantly scanning the environment for information about whether we're doing well, doing poorly, should I do something differently? I'm sure we're all experiencing that to a small extent in the networking opportunities at this conference, because when you're talking to a new person, you're trying to make that connection. It's an effortful process, and it's something that we really care about. So is there information that's telling people what their performance is? And then relatedness. We're very social as well. We want to connect with people. We want to feel like we're not alone. So am I a part of something larger than myself? And oftentimes reflecting back to people that they're not the only ones who have struggled with a particular area of behavior change can be a helpful way to help them feel this. You know, I'm not strange. This isn't a failure of my person, that I am not able to take care of this part of my health the way that I wish I could. I think that this is an interesting example of thinking about people's motivations. So this is from a project that we did with a children's hospital that is very, very invested in providing a top-notch patient experience. They've recently redesigned their facilities. They've invested a lot of money in trying to become a world-class destination for pediatric patients with certain serious health conditions. And they hired us to do some in-depth research to understand how their systems were supporting this patient experience that they hope to create and where there might be opportunities for improvement. And the reason I think of it as a motivational project is because it was one of those rare instances where all of the motivations of the different players in the system were well aligned. Everybody, the parents of the children, the administrators of the hospital who were our customers, the clinicians who were actually providing the care on the scene, they were all truly invested in making sure that these patients, they got healthy, that they got the care that they needed, and that they had as little distress as possible along the way. Because as you might know from firsthand experience, being a child in the hospital is incredibly scary. What the problem was in a lot of cases was that the administrators, the clinicians, the people who were working at the hospital didn't always adopt a child's eye or even a family's eye when they were designing the way that their systems or their physical location worked. So we talk a lot about, when our team realized at some point along the way that despite this beautiful animal-themed design in the hospital, all of the photos were up at adult eye level. And so that's what this is a picture of. It's one of the exam rooms where you can see that the artwork is well above the line of sight for a small child. The great thing, though, about those aligned motivations is that it makes the subsequent conversations a lot easier. So we're able to say to people, hey, you want this, I want this, let's figure out how to make it happen together. You can think of this, Amy Haymans yesterday used the phrase a virtuous cycle, and I think this is another example of a virtuous cycle where when you can help people connect to personally meaningful values and goals, it fuels these autonomous forms of motivations. And as they go out and they try behaviors, and hopefully they experience at least small successes along the way, and part of our job is helping them to see where they're experiencing those small successes along the way, that helps strengthen the connection to those values and goals. So when we keep connecting people to what matters to them, and helping them see how the things that are out in the world that they can try support that, then it helps to fuel this upward spiral. I wanted to briefly talk about an example. This is something that I'm passionate about, and over the course of my career, I feel like there's been a lot of debate about whether this is actually a good tool to use or not, but shared decision-making tools in treatment. So this is essentially a structured decision-making process where a clinician is able to talk with patients and their families about the options that they have. And the patient has a really strong voice in which treatment option they get. So this is not the doctor saying, hey, I've chosen a pharmaceutical for you, or I've chosen a surgical intervention for you, and this is the way that we're doing it. This is them sitting down together in conversation and saying, here are 3 good options. The physician has obviously curated this. And let's talk about which one you might think is right for you based on the things that you care about. So the Cochrane database of systematic reviews recently went and did a literature review of the usage of these tools. And the concern in the industry that I have heard at times has been, what if patients don't choose the right thing? What if they don't choose the right thing? And what this review found that I thought was really promising is, first of all, they're not choosing the wrong thing. Their outcomes are just as good as people whose doctors tell them what they have to do. But what I thought was really important, and it's in here, people who use decision aids may achieve decisions that are consistent with their informed values. Having this conversation with people about what their treatment options are and which one they want to pursue helps them to pick something that aligns with their values. And what that tells me as a psychologist is that when they embark on this road, and we know that when you have a medical condition, oftentimes the treatment is hard. There may be pain, there may be discomfort, there may be psychological discomfort associated with worry and stress. But if you have had your voice heard in making that decision, you are going to be far better equipped to weather those stresses. So I thought this was a really, really important finding, and I wanted to share it with you all. So from there, we're actually going to move into a little bit of an interactive session. I'd like to hear from all of you about either what your experience with behavior change has been or what you think it could be if that were something that you were to try to adopt into your organization. So we have 10 minutes for this, and we have a little bit of a back and forth structure. So I'll tell you how this goes. I'm going to pose two questions to you. There are actually two versions of the same question, so just depending on whether you have actually used behavior change in your initiatives or whether it's something you haven't tried yet, but you might think about doing in the future. So just pick the version that better reflects your experience. And I'm going to ask you for 2 minutes to jot down some notes or just think on your own about the answer to the question. I'll time you. I'll let you know when the time passes. And then for the next 3 minutes, I'd like you to talk with the people who are in your immediate seating area about what your thoughts are. And we don't have microphones in the crowd, so in order to make sure that we can hear the voices from all of you, I'd like you to then either tweet your best responses using the hashtag HXD2019, and Catherine and I will monitor Twitter so that we can share back some of what we're hearing. Or you can also use the Mobilize platform if that's something that you have available and you prefer. So we'll look at both right now. And then in the last few minutes of this session, I'll reflect back out some of what we're seeing from you all. So with that, the two questions, option A, if you have adopted a behavior change design approach, that's supposed to say lens, not sense. That's autocorrect. We were doing this on the fly this morning. If your organization has adopted a behavior change design lens for one of your initiatives, what would change? What would be different about the way that you approach that initiative? Option B, if you do use a behavior change design lens already, and I know many of you do, how are your projects different as a result of taking that perspective? So I'll give you 2 minutes now for the individual reflection part, and then we'll move into the group share. So we have one response that using a common behavior change model across all of our issues would result in more consumer-centric appeal. So having an identity in the way that we approach a problem. We have someone who's talking about using monetary awards and shifting instead to something that's a virtual reward that for intrinsic motivation, and then also showing growth and progress to people along their recovery journey. Oh, nice. We have one, stop asking, why aren't they doing what I want them to do? I love that. Recognizing that there's more than one right approach. Oh, changing the perspective on health data ownership. That's a really important topic right now. Who owns patient data? One of the reasons that we wanted to ask you to use the hashtag and the app for this, aside from trying to hear more voices in a short period of time, is because we really don't want this to be a one-time conversation. As Catherine was saying in her introduction this morning, with our whole approach to the center and even this event, we really want this to just be the start of an ongoing conversation and to have this be an important way to build fruitful relationships that persist. So please keep using the hashtag. A bunch of stuff started coming through at the end, and I think that knowing that we all have these shared passions, it can be the start of some really great conversations. So keep using the hashtag, keep using the app, and I hope to talk to a lot of you at the networking hours.